serious, families with incest members. Does the rest of the family know? How do they feel about it? My grandparents were first cousins. They had 3 kids. Oldest one no issues. Second died of lupus in her 30s. And my dad, the youngest, just severely depressed and ADHD. I don't think any of those issues were related to the incest. My grandmother was batshit crazy, so they are lucky they turned out as well as they did. My dad was a menopause baby and she told him his entire life that he was retarded due to that. I do not envy his childhood. One thing that did creep me out is when my uncle passed away earlier this year. In the obituary it said son of the late first name last name X, Margaret Smith. I couldn't believe she actually took her maiden name as her middle name in that situation. Sigh. Edited to add it was Kentucky in the 30s when they married. No one gave her it. Don't know if this counts, but my great grandfather married his daughter-in-law's sister. Meaning to my father his step-grandmother on the paternal side and his aunt on his maternal side were the same individual. I don't think they ever had kids though, as my great-grandfather was a lot older by that point. Nobody was too hung up about it. But we don't usually talk about that great-grandfather much because he was also a serial arsonist who burnt down 5 houses to collect insurance money and was never caught. My grandma has a half-sister who has twin daughters. One of the twins started dating her first cousin, father's nephew, about 3 or 4 years ago. It caused a bunch of it at first. Everyone was disgusted. They got made fun of. The jokes got worse after they had a baby together. The child's forehead looks like it has a dent in it. They're still together, expecting child number 2, and no one really gives her it anymore aside from the odd incest joke or 2. I have family on my grandma's side who are first cousins who married each other, arranged marriage. They lived in the same village, with a very small population. While it wasn't an issue in the family at marriage, both of their daughters have thalassemia because of it. One of the daughters only has a life expectancy of 30, and has to have blood transfusions monthly. The parents who married them off regret the marriage. Way back in my family's lineage we found evidence of cousins that married, and we joke about not having a family tree but a family wreath. I don't know how it was treated at the time, as this would have been at least 5 generations prior. Nothing ever happened, but my cousin went through a bad breakup and he tried to put the moves on me by sending dirty texts and a DVD. I ceased it. Only 2 other people know were my other cousins. We were grossed out and I haven't talked to him since then. My great-grandparents were first cousins. They were married for a couple years before they found out and divorced. Then remarried and had 4 kids. Anymore we make a couple jokes here and there, but it has been brought up in arguments a few times. It's also fun to tell the younger cousins and see the disgust I must have had when my aunts and uncles told me. My mom's grandparents were first cousins. They had 8 kids. 1 died of cancer at age 18. And my grandpa has Asperger's. My family doesn't really talk about it much other than it makes for an awkward joke every once in a while. They lived in Brazil in a small town way back when, so I guess it wasn't as big of a deal as it would be today. One time when my dad was young, his friend set him up on a blind date with a girl and they were really hitting it off. But after a few more dates they discovered they were second cousins and ended it there. So awkward lol. My mum's dad sexually assaulted some of his daughters when they were around 13-14, and one of the daughters continued sleeping with him, having sex with him into a much later age. She's had a few children with him. My family do not really acknowledge it at all and keep it on the hush. The children are entirely aware that their granddad also pairs up as their dad. No one talks about it but everyone knows it. It's actually a really weird sort of situation because some of my mum's sisters despises her dad for what he did, and the effect it had on her siblings as well as mother growing up, as well as hates her sister for continuing to do so. But a lot of the others don't even seem to think there's anything messed up with the situation at all and talk about how they love him, he was amazing etc, and completely turn a blind eye to it. This could be a facade. I don't know. The situation goes a lot deeper than just the above and it's very awkward and uncomfortable when he's brought up. Edited a typo. I don't think this is exactly incest, but it threw me for a loop for a bit. I am the family historian, and while working on my grandmother's side of the family, I found that I have a great uncle, let's call him Uncle A, who got married to Aunt A and had kids. Aunt A died and he married her sister, Aunt B, and they had some kids. They got divorced and she married his brother Uncle B and they had some kids as well. Also, it was apparently common back in the day for siblings to marry into the same family. My great grandparents were first cousins. No one gives or gave a bit. 1910s rural Ireland. As far as I'm aware, it was arranged to keep a farm in the family. My great grandfather was killed in 1925 by a runaway horse and cart when my granny was 4 and they lived with her grandparents on and off, and with her uncle and his wife on and off. The uncle was an eccentric postman, inventor, beekeeper and photographer. He used to take them on little holidays to beaches and landmarks, paid for by photographing people next to landmarks. She had many fond memories of her uncle and aunt. Her grandfather and all other uncles were carers, basically heavy haulage before trucks. They had transport solutions for everything, pulled by teams of horses, stone, milk, dry goods, you name it. They also ran a horse-drawn bus. Funny enough, none of them stayed in transport after mechanization. By that time they'd all come up enough in the world to get their kids well educated. Several of them became teachers, nurses, doctors, priests, nuns etc. So basically it all worked out. The only people who know about me and my brother is each of our best friends. I would not want to see what would happen if the rest of the family found out. We did also recently find out we had great grandparents who were first cousins, but that was common back then. So my mom dated her first cousin a few years back. The entire family was disgusted. We all tried to talk sense into her. They were public with their PDA. Not even remotely the craziest or trashiest thing my mom has done. She's a piece of work. Bless her heart. We pretend we don't know about it, and we've mostly stopped associating with that side of the family because the new generation have no qualms about dating relatives either. Given the family tree so far, they're all double or triple related by now, and it's just freaking weird. My dad's brother married a woman whose mother is also her sister. Oh, I just remembered a story my grandma told me years ago, so not somebody I'm related to, but so grandma's friends with this couple that, when they met, originally bonded over both being adopted. They fall in love, have 3 perfectly healthy kids, get some equally healthy grandkids etc. The fact that they have the exact same birthday is just a convenient coincidence, and maybe a bit of a at least he'll never forget when mine is joke. And then one of them gets sick and needs a donor, so off to get tested they go. Yup, twins. Grandma gets told matter-of-factly over lunch in a busy restaurant during the "so we haven't had time to see each other in almost 5 years. Here's what's been happening" part of the conversation. They had a big family-wide what do we do discussion, but since they were 30 odd years and with no obvious ill effects, they pretty much just updated a dozen or so medical records and called it a day. Pretty dark. But some genetic testing and a bit of digging has revealed that my mother was very likely conceived through incestuous abuse between my mother's mother, my grandmother, and her own uncle, my great uncle. The people who know the truth for certain are long since dead, save for the great uncle. But he's not far off himself. But it would explain a whole heaping pile of family secrets and, you know, the results of the genetic testing, which are fairly hard to deny. I don't think anybody in the family knows. They're a vast, distant family rife with lies and terrible people who likely wouldn't care if they knew. Though she was adopted out at a young age, my own mother fits right in with them. She's a dumpster fire of a human being gossip. Whether that's from her genes or her own abusive upbringing is yet to be determined. If the family did know, they most certainly wouldn't stop the behavior. I met said great uncle only once in my life. He aggressively hit on me upon learning I was his niece. I was maybe 14-15 at the time. When this was mentioned to the rest of the family, in shock that someone would be so disgusting so openly, I was told, "Oh, yeah, Uncle so and so is just like that. You learn to get used to it." Absolutely sickening. My great grandparents were first cousins. Most of the family makes jokes about it because we weren't close to them. My grandmother just says that's how things were back then. It was the 1930s, grandma. No, it wasn't. And that they really loved each other, which is all that matters. There doesn't seem to be any weird birth defects or illnesses in their 4 kids or any subsequent generations, so I guess it all worked out. My cousin's half-sister is the product of incest. Her parents were either brother and sister somehow down the line or cousins, I can't remember anymore. She's really off, but we always thought that was more from having two addicts as parents instead of the incest. My cousin and I would joke about it behind her back at first, but now it's just a thing that can't be changed, so nobody really cares anymore. The branches often grow back into the trunk. I used to work with a guy who had shared custody of his son with his ex. The ex and I have the same first name, so when he would talk about her he would refer to her by her first and last name. My co-worker and his ex had the same last name. Normal people would assume they had been married. The ex called into work one time while my co-worker was out. When he returned, I said, "Hey, your ex-wife called." His response, "No, we weren't married. We have the same dad." All I could manage to say was, "Oh." My parents are first cousins. Never really thought of myself as a child of incest. I have 2 siblings. We are all healthy. The rest of the family all knows. My parents had to get special dispensation from the Pope to marry and never bother with being secretive. It doesn't really come up in general conversation, though I have talked about it with a few friends. Got a few hick incest jokes, but that was the extent of it. As a lot of people point out below, cousin marriage often isn't considered incest. But whenever anyone has an issue in my family, we like to blame the double cousins on my mother's side. My aunt was doing genealogical research a little while back and thought a pair of names was familiar. She found out that instead of 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents. The person on the family tree only had 4 because a pair of sisters married a pair of brothers, so their children were double cousins. Then their children married each other. West Virginia for ya. Edit. I can't math. My 2 cousins, twice removed, ran away with each other when they were 15-16. They got married even though everyone was upset about it. Eventually, the family just accepted that they weren't going to stop being married to each other, especially when the couple had 2 kids. It became a "it is what it is" type of situation. One of their kids was born with a congenital heart defect and needed surgery to fix their heart, and the other was born with a cleft lip and scoliosis. I have an uncle who was born deaf and mute. For years I thought it was just a crazy birth defect until my cousin told me that he was the child of my grandma and my grandma's biological brother. Most people in my family don't know. My parents have always been kind of weird about me and my brother being so close, and I guess this is why. My ex-girlfriend was sexually assaulted as a child by her older brother and much more recently did sick stuff with her slightly younger half-brother who she had just met. Nobody knows except for me and, presumably, the 2 people involved in it. But it was like a week ago, so we'll have to wait to see what happens. I think this more or less qualifies. Obviously this is my throwaway because it was a weird family dynamic. To add to stereotypes, this takes place in the deep south. This gets confusing and long. So here is this. TLDR. My aunt also became my grandma. So my grandma went through a few husbands. Most died or left. And my dad's dad, my biological grandpa, left when my dad was young and died a long time ago. I never met him. Now, my dad married his first wife a long time ago and had a kid. They divorced. But his, now, ex-wife married another man we will call G. Well, G has an older brother we will call K. After a few years, K meets my grandma and they get married. This means my grandma went from being my dad's ex-wife's mother-in-law to her sister-in-law. Weird, but not where this gets to where I'd post about it. K is a nice guy and I have fond memoirs of him being my grandpa, although not my biological one. Well, my grandma dies and K shortly after decides to marry my aunt, grandma's daughter, for what they said was to get her out of a messy financial situation. I learned later on, as this was a few years back, that was really not true and it was just ducking weird and kinda creepy. That is to say, it was far from platonic. Most of my family was very upset by this marriage, as you can imagine. Anyhow, yeah. Technically my aunt, who I see every few years, is also my grandma. In a way, she is also my dad's sister and his stepmom. IDK it is and was weird. Thanks for reading. Reddit. A person rarely gets to say this. But man, am I glad that almost all the replies are about cousins ducking. I was preparing for the worst. I have a friend with an odd family tree. His stepmom's dad married his maternal mother. His half-sister on his dad's side has a kid that is older than his uncle. I remember walking through his family tree with him and it took about half an hour with all the but they were second cousins or my grandfather uncle and it like that. It made my head hurt. They are all super nice people so I don't really care. It's just funny because in this smallish rural town my best friend is related to at least half of the people in it. My aunt and uncle are both cousins of each other. They never knew until they were in a relationship and found out when the families reconnected. They decided to stay together as they felt their feelings were genuine. They're married now, but they have chosen not to have any kids. As far as I know, everyone in the family is very accepting of this relationship. Partly because my aunt and uncle are wonderful people. I guess it's not true incest but my half-sister married my cousin. They're not related, but it weirded everyone the duck out, and it still does. Same sister also ducked another cousin of mine. Also not blood related. All I can say is it's weird as duck, and I don't like it, though they're not related. I can literally say without a bit of sarcasm that my sister married my cousin. Mom is very close, not in a sexy way, to all of her cousins. One of her cousins has a daughter my brother's age, so she's our second cousin. But because our parents are so close we considered her a first cousin. She was for the longest time in love with my brother. She never tried to hide it, and her mother was okay with it, and possibly encouraged it. My mom, brother, and I were obviously not, and my bro refused her advances repeatedly. It lasted all the way up until he met the woman who would become his wife. Second cousin is married now too, to a guy who kind of looks like my brother. Two people I used to work with, brother and sister, were dating ducking. It came to light when they had a falling out and each of them respectively dated other people, while in the midst of their new relationships, cheated with their BF and GF to get back with each other. I know cause I was the boyfriend of the sister, and a good friend of mine was the girlfriend of the brother. There had been slight suspicions but I always passed them off because that it is just so unheard of. Then the girlfriend got proof and told me. They admitted it on the premise we didn't tell anyone. I didn't. But the girlfriend took it pretty hard and spread it around our work. They quit pretty soon after. As far as their family, they had zero contact with their family that I was aware of in the short time I was around. I was told there was a lot of abuse but only got vague details most of the time. Edit early and brain derp. My stepdad lost his virginity to his sister and routinely hooked up well into adulthood. My mom told his mother about but she brushed it off. His dad did not want sleeping in the same house with his second wife's daughter. He banged his brother's wife while they were married but they kept it civil. It was ducked up to say the least and my ma wisely divorced his ass. My paternal grandparents are cousins. I'm white British, not from Norwich though, and obviously no one really cares. They only met each other properly at a shared auntie's birthday party when my nan was 18 and my granddad fancied her right away despite them being cousins. Over the next few weeks he kept pestering her for a date. She finally agreed to a date when she found out he had a car lol. They went on a date and she knew then that she'd end up marrying him and yeah, the rest is history. Sadly she died 12 years ago though. They were always very in love and my granddad hasn't remarried or dated anyone since his wife's passing. Probably because all his other cousins are dead too. Not technically incest, but grandma's brother married grandpa's sister so J and C are my great uncle and aunt either way. Two fairly large families that lived down the street from each other and hung out a lot so, not too surprising I think. Mostly it's fun to bring up during introductions at a family reunion when somebody brings a friend or so or whatever that's meeting everyone for the first time. Oh, and yes, there will be a test. Jay's an identical twin so it gets fun sometimes. Oh, and J and C's first official date was my mom's first birthday party, which I've always assumed means that they showed up in the same car and got teased relentlessly. One of my grandfather's sisters married her first cousin. They had 3 kids. One died as an infant. The other has been in a wheelchair since they were a child. And the third has 2 kids herself. One with severe mental retardation. And the other with a neurological disease. Can't walk unaided. One of my husband's cousins ducked his sister. His own sister. Not my husband's sister. And they have a child. That child is severely developmentally disabled because of a rare genetic defect. Although I don't know if inbreeding is the culprit necessarily, i.e. if it's a defect that needs to be carried by both parents to be expressed, or if it was something that only needs to be carried by one parent and may have expressed regardless of parentage. It's not really talked about in his family, and his mom only told him the truth about this kid a couple years back. They are all from Florida and his mom tried really ducking hard to live a good life and teach her kids to do so as well. She is a single mom that left an abusive relationship and supported her kids on her own. She did a good job and now my husband is the first in his family to have a bachelor's degree. It's totally understandable that they want to put that kind of sordid behind them. What's real ironic is that the sister Adaka is so racist that he cut off contact with my husband many years ago when my husband first dated a non-white woman. A mixed race relationship is gross enough to cut off family for, but incest is apparently a-okay. My friend has a half brother from his dad's side who married a half sister from his mom's side. It's technically not incest, but it's still weird for my friend, and maybe his parents, because from his point of view, the family tree essentially circles around him and his full siblings. My sister-in-law's parents are uncle-niece. Sil was once questioned about having her middle name and last name the same. She said, oh, it's just a common name. No it isn't. I hate my Sil. Not quite incest, but my great-great-grandparents were brothers that married two women. Only one of the brothers was fertile. After being married for a while they both divorced and married the other person's wife and then proceeded to have kids. It was in Spokane in the early 1900s. It made national news. Both my maternal grandparents come from large families, so it's kind of inevitable there'd be some crazy it. We have a couple sets of second cousins that are married. It's known, just not really acknowledged. It's basically just the normal people parts of the family kind of rolling our eyes at the trashy people in the family. We have our own separate family reunion every year because the normal ones of us got sick of going to the Legion and having to pretend like we care about these bizarre people every year, even though we do still like to catch up with one another. One of them is now in jail because she confessed to her heroin buddy that she had self-aborted and buried the fetus in the backyard. That's the level of weirdness we've tried to deal with but have eventually just noped the hell out of. So I actually found out about 4 months ago that my paternal grandmother's parents were first cousins. I guess back then in Sicily it was an okay thing to do. It certainly explained why my father's side of the family is kind of crazy. Luckily, I'm normal cough. It's a well-kept secret in the family, like we don't tell outsiders and only certain people in the family know the story, that we really don't talk about, but when they do bring it up, it's kind of treated as a joke. So we have two cousins that are in a relationship, male-female. They may be married by now, not quite sure. They had it for a while and were just roommates, but it got out that they were an item. They aren't like first cousins. I have a very large extended family so I couldn't say exactly how they are related, but there is blood relationship there. So it's not close enough where it is totally disgusting, but we still all find it very weird. Not incest by blood, but still weird. My mom's biological father at one point was her stepfather. When my mom was a kid, her biological father divorced her mother and married an older lady, we will call her Lady A, who already had a few older children. My grandmother, maternal side, then remarries a new man, who is the son of Lady A. So my mom's new stepfather was her biological dad's stepson. It gets weirder cause my grandparents, maternal side, had more children after they remarried. My male cousin has attempted to groom every one of his younger female cousins, including myself, my younger cousin, and now my sisters. It is utterly disgusting. I have gathered evidence, shown his parents, my parents, our extended family. Nobody has done anything. His dad has terminal cancer right now, so I don't feel comfortable going to the police on him, because, well, his dad is dying. I can't let my uncle die with his only son in jail, so, instead, I'm gathering more evidence and keeping my underage sisters the duck away from this 27-year-old creep, and doing my best to have a solid, bulletproof case against him for when we do go to court. My grandmothers are first cousins after dumping my grandfather. My maternal grandmother had a daughter with my paternal grandmother's brother.